If you're a facilities manager at a university, you know students rely on the cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the occasional late-night snack. So when a dishwasher breaks down and dirty plates pile up, the mess hall can turn messy in the blink of an eye. Enter Grainger. With over 1 million industrial-grade products and fast delivery, the product you need now is never far away. So you can turn that dishwasher back into a lean, clean washing machine. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/audio.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you through the support of our sponsors like CartKing.com, Cart-King.com, 877-986-7771. If you've ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business, or maybe you want to add additional point-of-sale locations across the country quickly, CartKing.com is the answer to your needs. CartKing.com is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile retail coffee carts, food carts, and kiosks that money can buy. For 20 years, CartKing.com has been working with clients across America to provide indoor and outdoor carts and kiosks for any application. No matter what kind of business you're in or you want to go in, you check out Cart-King.com. Different styles, different models. You see which one applies to your business, and then they'll custom design it for you. They'll custom build it. They'll ship it worldwide. 877-986-7771. I'll give you a deal. I'll plug you buy one of these carts or kiosks, I'll plug your new business. And also, too, I'll give you a lifetime membership at OppermanReport.com. Pure Soap Flakes products. Okay, Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetics Guild. You can get their products at puresoapflakes.com, greenhome.com, amazon.com. You can get it at Whole Foods, or you can call 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils. You can bathe your body and wash your clothes with Pure Soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures, sensitive to skin, and it's safe for drains and waterways. So this is the kind of stuff you use this soap on your body. You're going to love it. I got a new shipment coming in right now. Use it on your pots and pans. There's a different version you can use on your pots and pans. Comes out cleaner than I've ever seen my pots and pans come in, and I do a lot of cooking. Then you got the laundry powder, man. Get all that scent and that, the chemicals out of your clothing. AlmightyGold.com. Get your gold in affordable quantities. This is going to be one of your last chances to sign up with almightygold.com, because we're about to lose them as a sponsor here. They've been sponsoring our show for us and they keep us on the air. So we really want to support them and keep them happy, keep them on the show. So you go to almightygold.com and you can sign up for free as an affiliate. You get an affiliate link. You post that link in your email, on your Facebook, on your Twitter. Anybody clicks on that link and purchases some gold in minor quantities, as little as $6 for 1/10 of a gram of gold. And it'll come in these little carrot bars there, embedded in a credit card. And once you got that, anytime someone clicks in there and buys one of those carrot bars, you're going to get a commission. You don't have to ship anything. You don't have to take any phone calls. You don't have to explain what you're doing. They click on the link. It goes directly to their website. They place the order. You get a commission. They also have a cryptocurrency that's backed by gold. And you can also go into the gold business, almightygold.com. Emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com, get an autographed copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. Also, too, there's a little bio in there, a little first paragraph, first chapter of the book is a bio about my life. And a lot of people like to hear about that. So you can get a copy of my book. Also, too, if you need a private investigator, we do email tracing, locates, background searches, background reports, asset searches. We can locate hidden assets. Secret bank accounts. We can locate secret email accounts. Yeah, okay. Can trace an email back to online dating websites and catch them cheating online. Adoption investigations, judgment recovery, all kind of great stuff at emailrevealer.com. Okay. Our first guest today is the legendary Dave Emory. For people who listen to this kind of topic, this kind of content, Dave Emory is a legend. I say it twice, legend. You can find him at spitfirelist.com and also WFMU.org. He has a podcast that comes out every Tuesday. Dave Emory, are you there?
I am very much here.
Thank you so much. For people who've been living under a rock or youngsters, who are just coming up, who is Dave Emory?
Well, I have been doing political research for about 50 years. I'm about to begin my 41st year on the air. I'm old media. I've adapted to the internet. I have my own website, spitfirelist.com. But when I began in 1979, the internet was still 16 or 17 years away. I began my research by looking at the assassination of President Kennedy. To make a very, very long story very, very short, the official version of that is readily verifiable nonsense. And the more I began to dig into it, the more it became evident that fascist and Nazi elements, both so-called street Nazis or quote neo-Nazis, I don't like the term, and also powerful financial and industrial elements who had backed Hitler and Mussolini and also the Japanese, and elements of the Third Reich's intelligence system that had been incorporated into the U.S. intelligence apparatus and joined onto the then fledgling CIA at the end of World War II under the auspices of Nazi General Reinhard Gehlen, were involved with that crime. It was basically a coup d'etat. And the more I looked into it, the more I began going both forward in time, examining what the elements who were involved with that crime were doing as they moved forward through time and through history, and also going backward in time to see how the various elements that came to collaborate on November 22nd, 1963, had been behaving historically, how they had been interacting with each other, how they had, again, supported Hitler and Mussolini, and how the fascist milieu that killed JFK, and which is very much in power today, had come to be. I think of the assassination of JFK from a functional / analytic standpoint as constituting the waste of an hourglass. I think if one both goes forward in time and backward in time, it is very revealing in terms of what one will learn. So that is it in a nutshell.
Well, explain to me then. The Allied forces won World War II, and then we were infiltrated by Nazi intelligence, came in and kind of took over from within?
Well, the Allied forces certainly won on the battlefield. The bulk of the military heavy lifting, to coin the term in Europe, was done by the Red Army and the Soviet Union. This is not to find fault with those Western allies who fought there or to minimize their sacrifice or their trauma. But the vast bulk of the heavy lifting from a military standpoint was done on the Eastern Front in World War II. The Allies did win a military victory in World War II, but the fact of the matter is that many of the most prominent industrialists and financiers in the world, particularly in the U.S., saw fascism, which Mussolini, the first fascist, defined as corporatism. Mussolini said, Il fascismo è il corporatismo. Fascism is corporatism, and he defined his fascist system as, quote, the corporate state. And beyond that, Hitler and Nazism incorporated racist and eugenics thinking that also was very, very popular in elite circles in the U.S. and around the world. Hitler drew much of his racial philosophy from American and British eugenics thinkers who saw immigrants, people of color, Jews, and other no-goodniks as literally inferior to Gentiles, to, quote, Aryans, unquote, and therefore felt that they should be, under optimum conditions, suppressed, if not outright excluded, or failing that, exterminated, as Hitler did that. Beyond that, the anti-communist and anti-labor doctrine of fascism, which in many ways was paramount, was of consummate appeal to prominent industrialists and financiers in the U.S. In 1934, many of those powerful interests grouped around the House of Morgan, the DuPonts, and other very important financial and industrial individuals and institutions attempted to overthrow Franklin Roosevelt in a coup d'etat. Elements associated with the Bush family were involved with that, and it was really only turned away because the fascist conspirators who had wanted Douglas MacArthur to lead the coup, but because of MacArthur's role in suppressing the bonus marchers in the early 30s, to make a long story short, in World War I, those soldiers who enlisted in the U.S. military effort in World War I were promised a lucrative cash bonus for doing so. The government reneged on that. When the Great Depression hit, and then when many of those veterans felt the financial pinch of the Great Depression, they lobbied Washington to get the bonus that Washington had promised them. And then ultimately, they organized a march, something of a huge sit-in in Washington, in order to get the cash bonus that they had been promised when they enlisted in the war a little over a decade and a half prior to that. The government not only did not ever give them their bonus, they crushed it militarily with armed force led by Douglas MacArthur, then General Douglas MacArthur, the Command Pacific leader. Because of that, MacArthur was not popular among the rank and file in the military. So the conspirators tabbed Marine Corps General Smedley Butler to lead the coup. But Butler was a patriot, so he betrayed the coup to Congress, to journalists, and to the Roosevelt administration, and it didn't go forward. There was actually a committee put forward, the McCormick-Dickstein Committee, to investigate that. But ultimately, no one was punished for that because the people who engineered it were simply too powerful to be brought to heel. Those same elements very much wanted the U.S. to enter World War II on the side of the Axis so that they could go and crush the Soviet Union. When Franklin Roosevelt cut off oil to Imperial Japan, that was seen by these same industrial and financial elements, small in number but very great in power. The U.S. had actually been fueling the Japanese war effort. They also sold them scrap metal for their war effort. And ultimately, pressure from a pro-British lobby and Franklin Roosevelt's own efforts led to a cutoff of U.S. oil shipments to Japan. That was what led to the attack on Pearl Harbor. The attack on Pearl Harbor was actually intended to neutralize U.S. naval capabilities in the Pacific, to free Japan up for what was known as the Strike South, which was a major Japanese thrust in the southern Pacific to capture the Indonesian oil fields to further fuel their imperial ascent. And that ultimately, because of the alliances that were in place at that time, led to the U.S. becoming involved on the Allied side of World War II. That was something that very much chafed with not only prominent industrialists and financiers, but in particular some associated Wall Street lawyers like William Wild Bill Donovan, who headed up the Office of Strategic Services, the U.S.'s World War II Intelligence Service, and the direct precursor of the CIA. Donovan actually toured Europe in the early 20s and had lunch and lent a sympathetic ear to none other than Adolf Hitler himself in 1923. The Bern, Switzerland representative of the OSS was Alan Dulles of the consummately powerful Wall Street law firm Sullivan and Cromwell. Along with his brother John Foster Dulles, Alan Dulles shepherded very, very powerful Wall Street money and American elite money into the Nazi war machine. John Foster Dulles cobbled together the consummately powerful IG Farben cartel, which was not only the backbone of Nazi industrial war production, but which also was instrumental in the political rise of Adolf Hitler. IG Farben then survived World War II, although it was broken up into the Bayer Company, the BASF, and the Hoechst Chemical Company since merged with others. It persisted. It thrived in the post-war period. Now, because of the anti-communist stance of the Nazis, many of these same lawyers.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/audio.
They were powerful Wall Street lawyers, but they were doubling as spies acting for the U.S. and the OSS. But during the Second World War, they were also networking with their counterparts on the other side. And Alan Dulles engaged in a series of negotiations with a guy named Walter Schellenberg. He was in charge of overseas intelligence for the SD, the Sicherheitsdienst, which was the intelligence service for the Nazi SS, the core of the Third Reich and the Nazi Party, their most powerful and elite element. Schellenberg tabbed a guy named Prince Eugen Max von Hohenlohe, who was an in-law of the Habsburgs, the powerful dynasty, who for 600 years ruled over the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And they began negotiating for what was euphemized as the Christian West. Now, this is not to be misunderstood as casting aspersions on or denigrating real Christians in any way. Rather, this was a way of putting sort of a happy face or a benign facade on the merging of the U.S. and Britain with the Third Reich in an anti-Soviet, anti-communist alliance. This was actually done during World War II. Now, what I'm about to say should not be misunderstood as holding a brief for the misdeeds of Joseph Stalin or other Soviet leaders, but the onus for the starting of the Cold War and the dissolution of what was known as the Grand Alliance, the alliance between Franklin Roosevelt in the U.S., Britain, and the Soviet Union, was not on the Soviet Union, but rather on the West. When Stalin and when Soviet intelligence got word of these negotiations, they basically clamped down in Eastern Europe to create sort of a cordon sanitaire, an area of defense, when they realized that the U.S. in particular, also Britain, were going to ally themselves with the residua of the Third Reich. The powerful cartel partners, cartel is an international monopoly of interests like IG Farben, people who work with the DuPonts, General Motors, Ford Motor Company, the Morgan interests in the financial sector, people who had Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles and others as powerful Wall Street lawyers. They were put right back in power in Germany. The key political leadership of Germany in the post-war period, at least for several decades, were basically Third Reich veterans. And most importantly, perhaps, a guy I alluded to earlier, Nazi Major General Reinhard Gehlen, who was in charge of Third Reich intelligence for the Eastern Front in World War II. He also became ultimately the most important Nazi intelligence officer, and after the collapse of the German fronts, basically was in effect running intelligence for both fronts during World War II. Gehlen, although not SS himself, was under the control of the SS, and he incorporated powerful elements of the SS and the aforementioned SD, the Sicherheitsdienst, the Nazi intelligence service, into his organization. 3 months after VE Day, Reinhard Gehlen was flown into the U.S. in the uniform of a 4-star general. He was given the pay of a 4-star general, and his organization, known as Foreign Armies East or Fremde Ost in German, became the CIA's Department of Russian and Eastern European Affairs, our window, so to speak, the purveyor of intelligence on the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe in the Cold War period was Hitler's intelligence service. And Gehlen cleared his actions both with Admiral Karl von Dönitz, who had succeeded Hitler as head of the Third Reich, and also with General Franz Halder, who had been his chief of staff. The point being that for information on the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, we were taking our information from the Third Reich Intelligence Service. They had a vested interest in, and most assuredly did, provide the U.S. with a wildly exaggerated view of what the Soviet Union intended or what it was capable of doing. The notion that the Soviet Union was going to invade Western Europe was simply fantasy. They did not have the capability of doing that. The Nazi army, or the Soviet armies rather, had suffered tremendous losses in the war against Nazi Germany. They were exhausted. They did not have the capability in terms of troop strength or armaments of operating in Western Europe, even if the U.S. had not had the atomic bomb, which of course it did. The key movement of large Soviet forces militarily was dependent on rail traffic, and the road gauges in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union were not compatible with those in Western Europe. So even had they intended to invade Western Europe, even had the U.S. not had the atomic bomb, they would not have been able to do so. However, communicating a wildly exaggerated view of what the Soviet Union was capable of doing and what it intended to do benefited the Nazis because they were able to say to the U.S., you see, you need us to help you combat this menace. And this was, frankly, music to the ears of many powerful interests in Washington. That was what people like Allen Dulles and William Donovan and the Bush family, who ran a business that was very closely connected to Nazi industry. We can talk more about that if you wish, Ed. That was what they wanted to hear. Furthermore, this was what the Pentagon wanted to hear, and it was what the Allied defense manufacturers wanted to hear. People should never lose sight of the fact that the Pentagon's annual budget exceeds the yearly corporate earnings of the entire Fortune 500 combined. It is enormous. And with profits like that as motivation, acting on a fundamentally alarmist and unrealistic view of the Soviet Union's capabilities and intentions was in their best interest. Again, this is not to say that I hold a brief for Stalin's excesses or that I would want Stalin or Lenin as the social director on a recreational cruise that I would be taking in the Caribbean, for example. But the fact of the matter is that the onus for starting and perpetuating the Cold War falls squarely on the West. Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty was a colonel in the Air Force and set up focal point networks, CIA-aligned networks in all government agencies, including the military itself, was a pilot, the lead pilot, and in command of a flight of 30 aircraft in August of 1944, who were evacuating U.S. POWs from the Balkans. Many of them had been U.S. Army airmen who had been shot down over the very costly raids over the Ploesti oil fields in Romania. Some of them had had their legs surgically removed at the knee so they couldn't escape. But on those flights in August of 1944, in addition to the American POWs who were being evacuated, Nazi intelligence operatives and their files on the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe were also being evacuated for subsequent use by the U.S. in the Cold War. The Cold War really began well before the conclusion of combat during World War II. Furthermore, as the Nazis retreated on the Eastern Front, the aforementioned Reinhard Gehlen had set up guerrilla groups composed largely of Nazi troops from the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, troops from the Ukraine, in particular the OUNB of Stefan Bandera, and these Nazi guerrilla forces carried on a fierce guerrilla warfare in the rear of the Soviet army that lasted until the early 1950s. And whereas that warfare and those troops began under the command of the Third Reich and the aforementioned foreign armies east or from the Heere Ost of Reinhard Gehlen, they were picked up in the Cold War period by the CIA under Allen Dulles. So you actually had a continuity of combat on the Eastern Front behind the frontline troops from the Third Reich on to the CIA. And the real, not the real, but perhaps the most profound and destructive outcropping of that alliance was basically the imposition of fascism in the U.S. behind the scenes. Not only did the powerful industrialists and financiers in the U.S. Continue and expand their relationships with their counterparts in Germany and also Japan as well, but Nazi elements were incorporated at the very core of the U.S. intelligence system, and there was a covert operation called the Crusade for Freedom. In 1948, it was widely believed that Thomas Dewey, the former governor of New York, and the Republican candidate for president, and his vice president, Earl Warren, the former governor of California, and the eventual Chief Supreme Court Justice, would win over Harry Truman. When they did not, the narrow defeat of Thomas Dewey and Earl Warren, whose campaign manager, by the way, although his official title was speechwriter, was none other than Allen Dulles, the same powerful Wall Street lawyer from both Sullivan and Cromwell, who had been the Bern, Switzerland representative of the OSS, who engaged in the Christian West negotiations with Prince Max von Hohenlohe on behalf of Walter Schellenberg, who, by the way, was a member of the board of directors of ITT, International Telephone and Telegraph. The blame for the defeat of Dewey in 1948 was at the hands of Jews who were seen as supportive of the Democrats because they wanted the formation of the State of Israel. So in order to provide a counterweight to the perceived influence of the, quote, Jewish vote, unquote, on behalf of the Democrats, Allen Dulles and a young, soon-to-be congressman named Richard Nixon, a protege of Allen Dulles, forged something called the Crusade for Freedom. Now, Richard Nixon ran for Congress in the post-war period, defeated a guy named Jerry Voorhees. Jerry Voorhees had led the fight on the floor of Congress to break up I.G. Farben, the Nazi chemical cartel, and the other German cartels who had, again, profound links with their American industrial and financial counterparts. And Allen and John Foster Dulles were right at the epicenter of those cartel agreements. What Dulles and Nixon cobbled together was something called the Crusade for Freedom. This was a completely illegal covert operation which in Europe channeled money to the so-called fascist freedom fighters. In other words, those same guerrilla forces originally formed under the auspices of the Third Reich, then received aid from the CIA. At the same time, the CIA and really an organization called the Office of Policy Coordination, or OPC, under another key former OSS operative named Frank Wisner, who, like Dulles and like Donovan, was a key Wall Street lawyer. Frank Wisner worked for a firm called Carter, Ledyard, and Milburn, which was the general counsel for the Dow Jones Corporation, at that time the owner of the New York Stock Exchange. They pulled some of the Crusade for Freedom money into efforts to build up what was literally an Eastern European Nazi presence, the Republican Party, so that many of the Eastern European ethnic groups, Polish, Ukrainian, and what have you, in the Rust Belt states, so-called Rust Belt states of the industrial Midwest and the Northeast, could be from an allegiance to Franklin Roosevelt and the Democratic Party, although Roosevelt was dead at that point, his influence was still very great, to the Republican Party. In that regard, Nazi and fascist elements, the aforementioned OUNB, Ukrainian fascists, who were returned to power following the Maidan coup in 2014. Romanian fascists, the Iron Guard, Bulgarian fascists under the Bulgarian National Front, the Croatian Ustashi, maybe the most brutal of all of those, and organizations like the Latvian Legion, and the Lithuanian fascists and others, the Linka Party in Slovakia. These have all fought with the Third Reich. They were all under the auspices of the aforementioned Reinhard Gehlen Nazi spy outfit. They then, while working both for the Nazi intelligence outfit, by now part of the CIA, became key operatives for the Republican Party in the U.S. They were called the Republican Ethnic Outreach Heritage Council. And this was literally a Nazi branch of the Republican Party. It was viewed as being able to deliver the key swing vote in 5 key states during election years. Eventually, it became a permanent branch of the Republican Party, and it was, again, a Nazi element of the Republican Party. It was the head of this project, Richard Nixon, who, by the way, there's a lot of focus now, Ed, on immigration. Nixon and the Republicans changed the immigration laws in the early 1950s to permit no more Nazis but members of Nazi SS, who then flooded into the U.S., and Nixon personally oversaw this. The Crusade for Freedom, in addition to providing backing for Nazi guerrillas in Eastern Europe, also provided for the creation of a Nazi element of the Republican Party. Again, the guy who oversaw that was Richard Nixon, who became a congressman, then a U.S. senator, and ultimately vice president under Eisenhower, and was elected president. The fellow who became the key spokesperson for the Crusade for Freedom was a former grade B movie actor from California named Ronald Reagan. Of course, he went on to become president as well. The fellow who handled the State Department machinations to bring these guys into the United States was none other than William Casey, himself a former operative of the Office of Strategic Services and later head of the Securities and Exchange Commission under Richard Nixon. William Casey was Ronald Reagan's campaign manager in 1980 and then went on to become head of the CIA when Reagan was elected president. The Republican Ethnic Outreach Heritage Council was, again, a Nazi branch of the Republican Party. It only had coalesced during presidential election years. However, in the early 1970s, it was made a permanent part of the Republican Party. It was headed up by a guy named Laszlo, L-A-S-Z-L-O, Pastor, P-A-S-Z-T-O-R. He was a Hungarian fascist who had been the liaison between Adolf Hitler and the Hungarian Arrow Cross. That was the fascist party of Hungary that was allied with the Third Reich. The guy who presided over the permanent installation of this Nazi branch of the Republican Party. Again, it only came together during presidential election years, but the guy who saw to it that it became a permanent part of the Republican Party was George Herbert Walker Bush, the man for whom CIA headquarters is named. So when Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980, you had the key spokesman for the Crusade for Freedom, this Nazi intelligence group within the Republican Party, being president of the U.S. His vice president was George Herbert Walker Bush, who had helped to install that Nazi branch of the Republican Party as a permanent entity. The guy who was head of the CIA was William Casey, who had handled the State Department machinations to bring these guys into the U.S. in the first place. And when one looks at the early appointments of Ronald Reagan, all of the key appointments were former Nixon cabinet members. General Alexander Haig, Caspar Weinberger, George Shultz, National Security Advisor Richard Allen, all had served under Richard Nixon, as had William Casey. George Herbert Walker Bush had been Nixon's ambassador to the UN and then became head of the Republican National Committee. So what you have is the formation of something called the Christian West, literally an alliance between the Third Reich and U.S. power structure and also the other Western allies as well. And that is something that haunts us to this day. Even though the Cold War is long gone, we are now stuck with the residua of this. So that, in a nutshell, is what happened, Ed.
Excellent. Listen, thank you so much. I'm riveted. Okay. We're going to take a little commercial break, but I want to ask you, do we see any of these same influences in the Democratic Party, specifically Jimmy Carter, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and the Democratic Party, you know, the Clintons, obviously, and Obama? Let's get into that when we get back, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's great stuff. Great content here with the legendary Dave Emory. Sitting here holding court, man. I can say it. Professor Dave Emory, thank you so much. This is great stuff. Spitfirelist.com, and you can check him out too at WFMU.org. Show comes out every Tuesdays. Check it out. Dave Emory, the legendary Dave Emory on the Opera Report. Thank you so much. We'll be right back after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. PureSoapFlakes.com, 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with pure soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. Order today at PureSoapFlakes.com, GreenHome.com, Amazon.com, or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild.
Hey you, podcast listener, this is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. Take the blue pill. You wake up in your bed and go back to listening to mundane podcasts that won't challenge your religious beliefs and your so-called truths about reality, the universe, and consciousness. Take the red pill. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast, hosted by Mark Anthony Peterson, and he will show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Event Horizon takes a walk into the paranormal with a splash of conspiracy. It's the podcast that would be born if David Icke and the X-Files had a baby. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast by Mark Anthony Peterson on Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Stitcher, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms. Remember, all we are offering is the truth, nothing more.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with the legendary Dave Emory, a real elder statesman in this field here. You can find him at Spitfirelist.com and WFMU.org. Now, Mr. Emory, I got a couple of questions for you. I asked you if the influence of the same Nazi penetration into the Democratic Party as we see in the Republican Party. And as well, I want to ask you, what about Trump today? It seems like we had this continued CIA influence in the presidency, Obama, Bush, Clinton, and then, but this Nazi influence, it seems to be opposing this ultra fascist, this front man, you know. So what can you, and keep in mind too, we only have about 15 minutes, but what can you tell us?
Well, there is no Nazi branch of the Democratic Party as there is with the Republicans. However, because of the Nazi presence in the Pentagon and the CIA, some of those elements have found their way into Democratic administrations. Now, you noted Jimmy Carter, who was not part of that, but also Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was of Polish extraction. He is part and parcel to the entire Gehlen Nazi organization. So he was very much associated with that. He worked for Radio Free Europe and was part and parcel to that entire milieu. Many of the policies that he implemented, such as his creation, or really his harnessing of the Muslim Brotherhood Islamic terrorists who had worked with the Third Reich during the Second World War as combatants against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. It was actually Brzezinski who lured them into Afghanistan in the first place. Ultimately, they morphed into Al-Qaeda, and branches of that same group became the Muslim, the Islamic State, and other organizations that we face to this day. Now, so yes, they have had some influence within Democratic administrations, because when you get into the CIA and the Pentagon and Wall Street, you're going to have influence in almost anything. That is not to say that there is an equivalence between the Democrats and the Republicans. There is not. But you will find those elements. Zbigniew Brzezinski, whom you scored, is a classic example of that. And the harm that man did is with us to this day. He was the one who really midwifed Al-Qaeda and its related elements. Now, you brought up a very good point. Trump himself is an outright fascist. He, according to his ex-wife and also a good friend of his who gave him the book, kept a copy of Adolf Hitler's speeches called My New Order, which was a sequel to Mein Kampf, in his night table for bedtime reading. And this was Donald Trump's idea of what he wanted to read when he wanted to drift off to dreamland. I mean, you might want to count sheep or read a novel or something. His idea of sleepy time, good vibes, so to speak, was to read Adolf Hitler's speeches. So now people go, oh, my goodness, what happened? Well, gee, what happened was what had to happen. If you look at Trump's heritage, he is part and parcel to all of the things that I spoke about. His father may very well have been in the Ku Klux Klan. The pastor who married him, and a very good friend of his, was a guy named the Reverend Norman Vincent Peale, who was best known as the author of the book, The Power of Positive Thinking. Peale had fronted for Nazi spies in World War II, specifically served as a front for a guy named Edward James Roomley. Again, he basically, the Reverend Norman Vincent Peale, was a Nazi spy during the Second World War for all intents and purposes, and he became the Trump family pastor and married Donald Trump and his first wife, Ivana. A close friend of Donald Trump's was a woman named Helena Fondon. She became Ronald Reagan's appointment secretary when he was president of the U.S., meaning she didn't schedule his daily routine. She selected the lists from which all of Ronald Reagan's cabinet appointments were made. A hugely influential person, and she was a close associate and, according to many sources, protege of a guy named Otto von Bolsing. Otto von Bolsing was a key Nazi SS officer. He was, for a time, Adolf Eichmann's superior in the, quote, Jewish department, unquote, Amt 4B of the SS and the Sicherheitsdienst. And he then jumped to the CIA under Allen Dulles and ran something of a parallel organization to Reinhard Gehlen's in the U.S. And Helena Fondon was basically a protege of his. The key attorney for Donald Trump was Roy Cohn, Joe McCarthy's right-hand man, and a fellow who, among other things, harnessed a network on behalf of Joe McCarthy called The Pond. That was put together by a veteran military intelligence officer named John Frenchy Grombach, who drew on a group of high-ranking SS officers that were headed up by General Karl Wolff, who was Himmler's personal adjutant and who had negotiated a separate surrender for the Nazi forces in Italy with Allen Dulles, again, without Roosevelt's knowing about it. And that was one of the things which, when Stalin found out about it, led him to conclude that he was being betrayed. And then he reacted as Joseph Stalin would particularly have reacted. He clamped down. Trump is an outright fascist and Nazi. He, however, is not really on the outs with the Republican Party. If you look at it, despite the fact that the guy in his entire life really never did anything honest. There's a very good, short, readable book called The Making of Donald Trump by David K. Johnston. It's only a little over 200 pages. And literally, in his entire life, Donald Trump has never done anything honest or forthright in his entire life. The guy is an outright crook, a liar, and a thief. However, he is giving the power interests of the U.S. what they want. He is giving the powerful corporations and wealthy individuals tax breaks. He is deregulating things all across. The financial reforms that were put into place in the wake of the Wall Street crash of 2008 have largely been removed, and I think we can expect another even worse financial collapse at some point in the future. Trump has also given the military everything they want, increased defense budget, carte blanche to do whatever they want in foreign countries, and he has also given the CIA a free hand as well. So even though Trump himself is an obviously tasteless bore and someone who is not as much of an Ivy League country club set politician as many of the Republicans like. He didn't go to an elite prep school or an Ivy League school. He did go to Wharton Business School of the University of Pennsylvania for a time. But because he is giving the Democrats, the Republicans rather, and the powerful interests associated with them, the corporations, the military, the CIA, the wealthy individuals, what they want, they are going along with them. That is not unlike the situation of Adolf Hitler. Hitler was actually a German army spy. He was infiltrated into the German revolutions that took place at the end of World War I and pretended to be one of the communist revolutionaries, then fingered the leaders of the revolution who were then promptly taken out and shot, and then, along with other German army military spies, became a member of what was initially an intelligence front, which was the Nazi Party. Ultimately, that became, obviously, the party. Hitler himself was a commoner. He wasn't a member. He didn't have a von in front of his name. He wasn't part of the aristocracy. He wasn't part of the industrial elite. Many of them, he also wasn't a general in the army. He didn't graduate from the German Kriegswehr Academy. Members of the German elite looked down on him. But because he gave them ultimately everything they wanted, they went along with his policies. And if you look at what's happening in this country today, for all of the naysaying that some Republicans are voicing about Donald Trump, they are going along with his program because he's giving them the judges they want in the Supreme Court and the appellate courts. He's helping to strengthen the gerrymandering and the voter suppression. He has removed any controls on the environment. He's gutted the EPA. And basically now any manufacturer of any type can put anything they want into food or medicine, or they can engage in any sort of environmental abuse. They can pour whatever kinds of poisons they want into the air, into the water, and they will not be held to account. He is working to destroy the Affordable Care Act, or what's left of it, and so they're going along with him. An indication of just how foul Trump is when all is said and done. There is all this discussion of the hashtag #MeToo movement, and people accusing Trump correctly, obviously, of misogynism. He was recorded in 2008, and then it came out during the campaign of bragging about reaching out and grabbing women by the P word, okay? And there was all this righteous plucking of tongues, people going, how could he have done something like that? This is terrible. But they went along with it. On stage, during the Republican convention, Donald Trump, I want to say Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump was introduced by his daughter Ivanka. When he came out on the stage, he ran his eyes up and down his own daughter. He ogled her in an overtly sexual fashion. That would have been, a look like that and an expression like that would have been considered aggressive or tasteless in a dating bar at midnight on a Saturday night, Sunday morning after 3 or 4 stiff drinks. But he not only did that to his own daughter, he then reached out and grabbed her by the upper part of her rear end. He sort of mimi-groped his own adult daughter, to coin a term, on stage at the Republican convention. I don't watch TV, Ed. I don't have one in the house. I don't watch it. I rarely go to the movies. I don't keep up with showbiz. But when I saw that on the internet and I clicked on the video segment, I couldn't believe it. I mean, he was not only checking out his own daughter, but basically feeling her up, pardon the French, on stage at the Republican convention, his own adult daughter. And yet, people went along with it. I mean, if they're going to put up with that, and they did, and the media put up with it too, what aren't they going to put up with? And that's pretty extreme.
We can do a whole show about that. I've had many guests on here who were young models who were, encountered Trump and my own involvement too in the Trump Epstein lawsuit back in 2016. But Dave Emory, the great Dave Emory, we are out of time, my friend. I'm going to beg you to come back. And if there's ever anything you want to get out on the air, you want to bring on my show, you have an open door here. You can come back anytime you like. Just call me 5 minutes before the show. I'll put you right on. Okay. I really.
Well, that is a great, very generous and gratifying offer. And again, SpitfireList.com is the website. It has all of my life's work on there. There is a flash drive that you can get containing all of the information on the website. I don't get any money from that. And sister station WFMU is podcasting the program as well. So if you would like the program podcast, you can, there is a link on the SpitfireList.com website, or go to WFMU.org and look for Dave Emory, and you can have it podcast as well.
Dave Emory, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
It is a pleasure, Ed, and anything I can do for you, please don't hesitate to call.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Very good.
Okay, there we had Dave Emory. You can find, like you said, SpitfireList.com and WFMU.org. Thank you so much, Dave Emory. What a legend in this business, a real elder statesman. Like I said, tried to get out several times. I got a list of questions here I would love to ask him, but they just couldn't get a word in. But, listen, I sat back here and I enjoyed myself. Thank you so much, Dave Emory. And if you like today's show, make sure you check out OppermanReport.com. If you search Dave Emory and you found this show, many of the things he was talking about here with the Trump, with the teenage girls and stuff like that, we cover that ad nauseum here. People get sick, but I was actually the private investigator that I was involved in the lawsuit against Trump and Jeffrey Epstein in 2016. So I was professionally involved in that case. And also too, we had many, many young models here. We talked about Trump perving on them and stuff like that. We've talked about Trump and his connections to, John Casablancas and Trump's own modeling agency, and Trump turning his daughter over to John Casablancas, an elite modeling agency when she was a little child. So we've gone over these topics in detail. Okay, but thank you so much once again, Dave Emory. You can find the archives to OppermanReport.com at Spreaker.com. Over 2,000 shows on there now. We've just hit 4 million views on Spreaker.com. That's free. You go to Spreaker.com, you can sign up there for free, and you can listen to all the archives. You can search for different shows we've done about Trump and stuff like that we were just talking about just now. We have also a member section at OppermanReport.com. I'm offering a discount. Contact me at OppermanReport@gmail.com. I'll give it 13 months for $65. We're trying to get my daughter into college. Hey, I want to give a shout out to Alan Warren, who comes on at 9 p.m. on KCAA AM/FM right before the Opperman Report, the House of Mystery. Great content, always kind of great topics like we cover here too. If you enjoy his show, you'll enjoy our show, and vice versa. So if you tune in at 10, start tuning in at 9 and catch good old Alan Warren. He's always been kind to our show here, and we appreciate his kind words. So thank you so much once again. What's coming up next? And my daughter's GoFundMe, help Victoria Opperman get to college. We got about 2 weeks left before we leave for Washington, D.C. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dave Emory, the legendary Dave Emory, SpitfireList.com and WWFMU.org. emailrevealer.com. People ask me all the time, hey, Ed, are you still a private investigator? I sure am. Go to emailrevealer.com. We handle adoption investigations, infidelity investigations, where you give us your spouse's email address. We trace it back to online dating websites, catch them cheating online, digital forensics, computer forensics, cell phone forensics, recover deleted text messages, create a report that you can use in court. Emailrevealer.com, 800-572-9762.